On a warm summer night in Beverly Hills, August 20th, 1989, something terrible happened inside a mansion on Elm Drive. But to understand that night, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to meet a family that looked perfect from the outside. The Menéndez family seemed to have everything. José Menéndez was a powerful businessman who had climbed his way to the top. He ran a major entertainment company and made millions of dollars. His wife, Kitty, was a former beauty queen who stayed home to raise their two sons. They lived in a huge house worth millions, drove expensive cars, and threw fancy parties. Their sons were Lyle and Erik. Lyle was the older brother, confident and outgoing. Erik was younger, quieter, and loved tennis. Both boys went to the best schools money could buy. From the outside, they were living the American dream. But sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. If you're already hooked and want to see how this story unfolds, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us what you think happened. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Let's go back to that summer night in 1989. Lyle was 21 years old. Erik was 18. They told the police they had been at the movies watching a film called Batman. When they came home around 11 at night, they said they found their parents dead in the living room. The scene was horrific. José and Kitty had been shot multiple times with shotguns. The police counted 15 shots total. This wasn't just a murder. This was something else, something violent and personal. The boys called 911, screaming and crying. "Somebody killed my parents," Lyle shouted into the phone. When the police arrived, they found two young men in shock, devastated by what they had found. At first, everyone felt sorry for them. These poor boys had lost their parents in such a brutal way. The media covered the story. Neighbors brought food. Friends offered comfort. But the police started to notice something strange. In the weeks after the murders, Lyle and Erik started spending money. A lot of money. We're not talking about buying groceries or paying bills. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Erik bought a cheap Wrangler and hired a tennis coach for $50,000 a year. Lyle bought a Rolex watch worth $15,000. They went to expensive restaurants. They took trips. They acted like lottery winners, not like sons in mourning. The police began to wonder, why would two grieving sons be spending so much money so soon after their parents died? Then there was the issue of the will. José and Kitty had a life insurance policy worth about $15 million. If they died, the boys would inherit everything. The house, the cars, the business interests, everything. Detectives started asking questions. They looked closer at the crime scene. Those 15 shotgun blasts, they weren't random. Someone had reloaded the guns. Someone had fired, stopped to reload, and fired again. This took time. This took planning. Could this have been the work of the mob, like some people suggested? José had made enemies in business. He was tough and ruthless. Maybe someone wanted revenge? Or could it be something else? Something closer to home? 6 months passed. The investigation went cold. The police had suspicions, but no proof. Lyle and Erik went on with their lives, spending their inheritance, trying to move forward. But someone knew the truth, and that someone was about to crack. Erik had been seeing a psychologist named José Azil. In therapy sessions, people talk about their feelings, their problems, their secrets. And Erik had a very big secret. In March 1990, 7 months after the murders, Erik told Dr. Azil something shocking. He confessed. He told the doctor that he and Lyle had killed their parents. Dr. Azil was in a difficult position. Normally, what you tell your therapist is private. It's protected by law. But there's an exception. If the therapist believes you're a danger to yourself or others, they can break that confidentiality. The doctor recorded some of their sessions. He kept notes. And eventually, his girlfriend at the time told the police about the tapes. On March 8, 1990, the police arrested Lyle while he was leaving the house on Elm Drive. 3 days later, they arrested Erik when he flew back from a tennis tournament in Israel. The perfect family image shattered completely. The two sons everyone had felt sorry for were now accused of murdering their own parents for money. Before we continue, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments. Do you think money was really the only reason? Because what comes next will change everything you think you know about this case. The brothers were charged with first-degree murder. If convicted, they could face the death penalty. The trial became a media sensation. Court TV broadcast it live. Millions of people tuned in every day to watch. This was 1993, and the Menéndez trial was one of the first cases to be shown on television like this. The prosecution's case seemed simple. Two greedy sons killed their rich parents to get their inheritance. They had motive, they had opportunity, and Erik had confessed to his therapist. The defense didn't deny that Lyle and Erik pulled the triggers. They admitted it from the start. But they said there was a reason, a terrible reason that explained why two young men would do something so horrible. The defense team told a different story, a darker story, a story about what had been happening inside that perfect-looking house on Elm Drive. They said José Menéndez wasn't the successful businessman everyone admired. Behind closed doors, they claimed he was a monster. They said he had been abusing Erik sexually since Erik was 6 years old. They said Lyle had been abused, too, when he was younger. They said Kitty knew about the abuse but did nothing to stop it. She was often drunk and emotionally abusive herself, they claimed. The defense argued that Lyle and Erik didn't kill for money. They killed because they were terrified. They believed their father was going to kill them to keep the abuse secret. This changed everything. Was this a cold-blooded murder for inheritance money? Or was it self-defense by two young men who had been tortured their whole lives? The trial lasted months. Both brothers took the stand and testified. Erik cried as he described years of abuse. Lyle talked about trying to protect his younger brother. Family members testified. Some supported the brothers' story. Others said they never saw any signs of abuse and believed the boys were lying to avoid prison. The therapist's tapes were played in court, though much of them were ruled inadmissible because of doctor-patient confidentiality rules. The jury had to decide, were these cold-blooded killers or victims fighting back? In January 1994, after months of testimony, both juries, there was one for each brother, came back with their verdicts, but they couldn't agree. Some jurors believed the abuse story and wanted to convict the brothers of manslaughter, not murder. Other jurors thought it was all lies and wanted first-degree murder convictions. The juries were deadlocked. Hung. The judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial. The prosecution decided to try again. There would be a second trial. But this time things would be very different. The second trial started in 1995. The judge made new rules. This time the brothers would be tried together with one jury instead of separately. And this time much of the abuse testimony would be limited. The defense couldn't present their case the same way. The jury wouldn't hear all the details about the alleged abuse. The playing field had shifted. For months the trial continued. The nation watched again. The brothers sat in court, their fate in the hands of 12 strangers on March 20th, 1996. The jury came back. This time they had reached a verdict. Guilty. First-degree murder. Both brothers. On July 2nd, 1996, they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They were sent to different prisons, separated for the first time since that terrible night in August 1989. For most people, the story ended there. Two brothers who killed their parents were behind bars where they belonged. But for Lyle and Erik Menéndez, this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. A journey that would take decades and involve new evidence, new witnesses, and new questions about what really happened inside that house. Because sometimes the truth is more complicated than any verdict, and sometimes cases that seem closed are just waiting to be reopened. Life in prison is hard for anyone. But for Lyle and Erik, it was especially difficult because they were separated. For years, they were kept in different prisons across California. They could write letters to each other, but they couldn't see each other, couldn't talk face to face. Despite being locked away, both brothers tried to make something of their lives behind bars. Erik got married in 1999 to a woman named Tammy. She had written to him while he was in prison, and they fell in love through letters and phone calls. Lyle got married twice while in prison. His first marriage ended in divorce, but he married again in 2003 to a woman named Rebecca. Both brothers took college courses. They participated in prison programs. Erik created art and helped other inmates learn to read. Lyle worked in programs to help disabled prisoners. They weren't the wild young men who had spent money carelessly after their parents died. They had grown up, matured, changed. But they were still serving life sentences without parole. That meant they would die in prison. No matter how much they changed, no matter how much good they did, they would never be free. Years passed. The case faded from the news. New scandals and trials took over the headlines. The Menéndez brothers became just another old story, something people talked about when they remembered the 1990s. Then, in 2018, something unexpected happened. The brothers were finally reunited. After more than 20 years apart, they were both transferred to the same prison, Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. A photo of their reunion went viral online. Two middle-aged men, now in their 40s and 50s, hugging each other for the first time in 2 decades. People who saw the photo were moved. These weren't the young men from the trial. They were older, grayer, different. But the reunion was just the beginning. Something bigger was coming. In 2023, almost 35 years after the murders, new evidence came to light. Evidence that could change everything. First, there was a letter. Erik's lawyers found a letter that Erik had written to his cousin Andy 8 months before the murders. In the letter, Erik talked about the abuse. He wrote about being scared of his father. He mentioned things that matched exactly what he had said in court. This was important because critics had always said the abuse story was made up after the murders to avoid punishment. But this letter was written before the murders happened. It was proof that Erik had been talking about abuse long before anyone knew about the killings. Then came an even bigger revelation. A man named Roy Rosello came forward. Roy had been a member of a famous Puerto Rican boy band called Menudo in the 1980s. Menudo was huge like the boy bands of today. They sold millions of records and had fans all over the world. Roy said that when he was a teenager, around 13 or 14 years old, José Menéndez had abused him sexually. At the time, José was an executive at RCA Records, the company that managed Menudo. Roy had kept this secret for decades, afraid and ashamed. But when he heard about the new attention on the Menéndez case, he decided to speak up. He wanted people to know that the brothers had been telling the truth about their father. This was explosive. Here was someone completely unconnected to the family saying that José Menéndez had done exactly what the brothers claimed he did. If this story is gripping you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss updates on cases like this. And drop a comment. Do you think this new evidence changes everything? The brothers' lawyers filed what's called a habeas corpus petition. This is a legal document that asks the court to reconsider a case based on new evidence. They argued that if this evidence had been available during the trial, the outcome might have been different. The case was back in the news. Documentaries were made. Podcasts discussed every detail. Social media exploded with people debating whether the brothers deserved another chance. Some people said the new evidence proved the brothers had been telling the truth all along. They had killed their parents, yes, but only because they had been abused for years and feared for their lives. Others said it didn't matter. Even if the abuse was real, murder was still murder. The brothers could have run away, called the police, or asked for help. They didn't have to kill. The legal system moved slowly, as it always does. Months passed, then years. In December 2024, there was a hearing. The Los Angeles County District Attorney at the time, George Gascon, recommended that the brothers be resentenced. He believed they had served enough time and should be eligible for parole. But then something changed. Gascon lost his re-election campaign. A new district attorney, Nathan Hochman, took office in January 2025. Hochman was more cautious. He wanted to review everything carefully before making any decisions. On May 14, 2025, a judge made a decision about the resentencing. The judge decided to resentence both brothers. Their life sentences without parole were changed to life sentences with the possibility of parole. This was huge. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Lyle and Erik had hope. They might actually get out of prison someday. But getting resentenced didn't mean they were free. It just meant they could now ask for parole. And the parole board would have to decide if they were ready to be released. The parole hearings were scheduled for August 2025. On August 20th, 2025, exactly 36 years after their parents' murders, Lyle had his parole hearing. He appeared before the board via video from prison. He talked about his crimes, his remorse, and how he had changed over the decades. The board listened. They asked questions. They reviewed his record in prison, which was mostly good. He had taken responsibility for what he did. He had participated in programs. He had tried to become a better person. But the board had to think about public safety. They had to consider whether Lyle would be a danger if released. They had to weigh everything. After deliberating, they made their decision. Denied. Lyle would not be granted parole. He could try again in 3 years. 2 days later, on August 22nd, it was Erik's turn. His hearing went similarly. He spoke about his regrets, his growth, his understanding of what he had done. The parole board again said no. Erik's parole was also denied. The brothers and their supporters were disappointed but not surprised. Parole is rarely granted on the first try, especially for someone convicted of murder. Then, in September 2025, another setback. A judge denied their habeas corpus petition, the one based on the new evidence about the letter and Roy Rossello's testimony. The judge acknowledged that the evidence was important, but legally it wasn't enough to overturn their convictions. The system has very high standards for overturning old cases, and this evidence, while significant, didn't meet those standards. So where does that leave Lyle and Erik Menéndez today? They're still in prison. They're still serving life sentences. But now they have something they didn't have before, the possibility of parole. Every 3 years they can go before the parole board and make their case again. Maybe next time will be different. Maybe as more time passes, as they continue to show good behavior, as public opinion continues to shift, the board will decide differently. Their story raises difficult questions that don't have easy answers. If someone is abused as a child, does that excuse violence later? Where is the line between self-defense and murder? Can people truly change, or should they pay for their crimes forever no matter what? Different people will answer these questions differently. Some believe Lyle and Erik are exactly where they belong. They took 2 lives in a brutal way. They spent money and partied afterward. They deserve to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Others believe the brothers have suffered enough. They were abused children who snapped after years of torment. They've served 35 years, more than many murderers serve. They've grown, changed, and tried to make amends. They deserve a second chance at life. The truth is probably somewhere in between. This case isn't simple. It never was. What we know for certain is this. On August 20th, 1989, 2 parents were killed by their own sons. Whether it was cold-blooded murder or a desperate act by traumatized victims, José and Kitty Menéndez lost their lives. 2 young men threw away their futures, and a family was destroyed forever. Lyle and Erik Menéndez will likely spend the rest of their lives trying to answer one question. Was there another way? Could they have escaped? Could they have gotten help? Could they have broken the cycle of abuse without violence? We'll never know what might have been. We only know what happened. And what happened on that summer night in Beverly Hills changed everyone involved forever. The prosecutors who tried the case, the jurors who decided it, the family members who testified, the therapist who heard the confession, and of course Lyle and Erik themselves. Justice means different things to different people. For some, justice was served when the brothers were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For others, justice would mean acknowledging the abuse and giving them a chance at freedom. The legal system has spoken multiple times. The brothers were convicted, sentenced, and had their appeals denied. The new evidence wasn't enough to change that. But the court of public opinion remains divided, and the debate continues. As Lyle and Erik grow older behind bars, they live with their choices every single day. They live with the memory of what they did. They live with the knowledge that they can never undo it. Whether you see them as victims, villains, or something in between, their story is a reminder that families can hide terrible secrets. That abuse can happen anywhere, even in mansions in Beverly Hills. That trauma can lead people to do unthinkable things, and that sometimes there are no simple answers. The Menéndez brothers' case isn't over. As long as Lyle and Erik are alive, they'll keep fighting for freedom. They'll keep going before the parole board. They'll keep hoping that someday, somehow, they might walk out of prison. Whether that day ever comes remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the case of the Menéndez brothers will continue to fascinate, disturb, and divide us for years to come, because it asks us to grapple with questions we'd rather not face. Questions about family, about justice, about forgiveness, and about whether anyone, no matter what they've done, deserves a second chance.